When the spoils had been divided, the Greeks sailed to the isthmus, where a prize of valor was to be awarded to the man who, of all the Greeks, had shown the most merit during the war. When the chiefs were all come, they met at the altar of Poseidon and took the ballots wherewith they were to give their votes for the first and for the second in merit. Then each man gave himself the first vote, since each considered that he was himself the worthiest. But the second votes were given chiefly to Themistocles. In this way, while the others received but one vote apiece, Themistocles had for the second vote a large majority of the suffrages. Envy, however, hindered the chiefs from coming to a decision, and they all sailed away to their homes without making any award. Nevertheless, Themistocles was regarded everywhere as by far the wisest man of all the Greeks, and the whole country rang with his fame. As the chiefs who fought at Salamis, notwithstanding that he was really entitled to the prize, had withheld his honour from him, he went without delay to Lacedaemon, in the hope that he would be honoured there, and the Lacedaemonians received him handsomely and paid him great respect. The prize of valour indeed, which was a crown of olive, they gave to Eurybiades, but Themistocles was given a crown of olive too, as the prize of wisdom and dexterity. He was likewise presented with the most beautiful chariot that could be found in Sparta, and after receiving abundant praises, was upon his departure escorted as far as the borders of Tegea by the 300 picked Spartans who are called the Knights. Never was it known, either before or since, that the Spartans escorted a man out of their city. As for the part of the fleet of Xerxes which had survived the battle, when it had made good its escape from Salamis to the coast of Asia, and conveyed the king with his army across the strait from the Chersonese to Abydos, it passed the winter at Kyme. On the first approach of spring, there was an early muster of the ships at Samos, where some of them indeed had remained throughout the winter. Further west than Samos, however, they did not venture to proceed, for they remembered what a defeat they had suffered, and there was no one to compel them to approach any nearer to Greece. They therefore remained at Samos and kept watch over Ionia to hinder it from breaking into revolt. The whole number of their ships, including those furnished by the Ionians, was 300. It did not enter into their thoughts that the Greeks would proceed against Ionia. On the contrary, they supposed that the defence of their own country would content them, more especially as they had not pursued the Persian fleet when it fled from Salamis, but had so readily given up the chase. They despaired, however, altogether of gaining any success by sea themselves, though by land they thought that Mardonius was quite sure of victory. So they remained at Samos and took counsel together, if by any means they might harass the enemy, at the same time that they waited eagerly to hear how matters would proceed with Mardonius. The approach of spring and the knowledge that Mardonius was in Thessaly roused the Greeks from inaction. Their land force, indeed, was not yet come together, but the fleet, consisting of 110 ships, proceeded to Aegina, under the command of Leotychides. When the whole fleet was collected together at Aegina, ambassadors from Ionia arrived at the Greek station. They had but just come from paying a visit to Sparta, where they had been entreating the Lacedaemonians to undertake the deliverance of their native land. The Greek fleet now set out for Delos, but Mardonius still abode in his winter quarters in Thessaly. Mardonius sent next an envoy to Athens. This was Alexander, the son of Amyntas, a Macedonian, of whom he made choice for 2 reasons. Alexander was connected with the Persians by family ties, for Gygea, who was daughter of Amyntas and sister to Alexander himself, was married to Bubaris, a Persian, and by him had a son, to wit, Amyntas of Asia, who was named after his mother's father and enjoyed the revenues of Alabanda, a large city of Phrygia, which had been assigned to him by the king. Alexander was likewise, and of this too Mardonius was well aware, both by services which he had rendered and by formal compact of friendship, connected with Athens. Mardonius therefore thought that by sending him he would be most likely to gain over the Athenians to the Persian side. He had heard that they were a numerous and warlike people, and he knew that the disasters which had befallen the Persians by sea were mainly their work. He therefore expected that if he could form alliance with them, he would easily get the mastery of the sea, as indeed he would have done beyond a doubt, while by land he believed that he was already greatly superior, and so he thought by this alliance to make sure of overcoming the Greeks. Perhaps, too, the oracles leant this way, and counselled him to make Athens his friend, so that it may have been in obedience to them that he sent the embassy. When Alexander reached Athens as the ambassador of Mardonius, he spoke as follows: O men of Athens, these be the words of Mardonius. The king has sent a message to me, saying, All the trespasses which the Athenians have committed against me I freely forgive. Now then, Mardonius, thus shalt thou act towards them. Restore them their territory, and let them choose for themselves whatever land they like besides, and let them dwell therein as a free people. Build up likewise all their temples which I burned, if on these terms they will consent to enter into a league with me. Such are the orders which I have received, and which I must needs obey, unless there be a hindrance on your part. And now I say unto you, why are ye so mad as to levy war against the king, whom ye cannot possibly overcome, or even resist for ever? Ye have seen the multitude and the bravery of the host of Xerxes. Ye know also how large a power remains with me in your land. Suppose then ye should get the better of us and defeat this army, a thing whereof ye will not, if ye be wise, entertain the least hope. What follows even then but a contest with a still greater force? Do not, because you would fain match yourselves with the king, consent to lose your country and live in constant danger of your lives. Rather, agree to make peace, which ye can now do without any tarnish to your honour, since the king invites you to it. Continue free, and make an alliance with us, without fraud or deceit. These are the words, O Athenians, which Mardonius had bid me speak to you. But I will add to my entreaties also, and beseech you to give ear to Mardonius, for I see clearly that it is impossible for you to go on for ever contending against Xerxes. Hearken then, I pray you, to Mardonius. Surely it is no small matter that the great king chooses you out from all the rest of the Greeks, to offer you forgiveness of the wrongs you have done him, and to propose himself as your friend and ally. Such were the words of Alexander. Now the Lacedaemonians, when tidings reached them that Alexander was gone to Athens to bring about a league between the Athenians and the barbarians, and when at the same time they called to mind the prophecies which declared that the Dorian race should one day be driven from the Peloponnese by the Persians and the Athenians, were exceedingly afraid lest the Athenians might consent to the alliance with Persia. They therefore lost no time in sending envoys to Athens, and it so happened that these envoys were given their audience at the same time with Alexander. As soon as Alexander had finished speaking, the ambassadors from Sparta took the word and said, We are sent here by the Lacedaemonians to entreat of you that ye will not now do a new thing in Greece, nor agree to the terms which are offered you by the barbarian. Such conduct on the part of any of the Greeks were alike unjust and dishonourable, and in you 'twill be worse than in others for divers reasons. 'Twas by you that this war was kindled at the first among us. Our wishes were in no way considered. The contest began by your seeking to extend your empire. Now the fate of Greece is involved in it. Besides, it was surely an intolerable thing that the Athenians, who have always hitherto been known as a nation to which many men owed their freedom, should now become the means of bringing all other Greeks into slavery. We feel, however, for the heavy calamities which press on you, the loss of your harvest these last 2 years, and the ruin in which your homes have lain for so long a time. We offer you, therefore, on the part of the Lacedaemonians and the allies, sustenance for your women and for the unwarlike portion of your households, so long as the war endures. Be ye not seduced by Alexander the Macedonian, who softens down the rough words of Mardonius. He does as is natural for him to do. A tyrant himself, he helps forward a tyrant's cause. But ye, Athenians, should do differently, at least if ye be truly wise. For ye should know that with barbarians there is neither faith nor truth. Thus spake the envoys. After which the Athenians returned this answer to Alexander: "So long as the sun keeps his present course, we will never join alliance with Xerxes. Nay, we shall oppose him unceasingly, trusting in the aid of those gods and heroes whom he has lightly esteemed, whose houses and whose images he has burnt with fire. And come not thou again to us with words like these, nor thinking to do us a service, persuade us to unholy actions. Thou art the guest and friend of our nation. We would not that thou shouldst receive hurt at our hands." Mardonius, when Alexander upon his return made known to him the answer of the Athenians, forthwith broke up from Thessaly, and led his army with all speed against Athens, forcing the several nations through whose land he passed to furnish him with additional troops. However, he did not in his arrival in Attica find the Athenians in their country. They had again withdrawn, some to their ships, but the greater part to Salamis, and he only gained possession of a deserted town. It was 10 months after the taking of the city by the king that Mardonius came against it for the second time. Mardonius, being now in Athens, sent an envoy to Salamis, one Murikides, a Hellespontine Greek, to offer the Athenians once more the same terms which had been conveyed to them by Alexander. The reason for his sending a second time, though he knew beforehand their unfriendly feelings towards him, was that he hoped, when they saw the whole land of Attica conquered and in his power, their stubbornness would begin to give way. On this account, therefore, he dispatched Murikides to Salamis. Now, when Murikides came before the council and delivered his message, one of the councillors, named Lycidas, gave it as his opinion that the best course would be to admit the proposals brought by Murikides and lay them before the assembly of the people. The Athenians, both those in the council and those who stood without, when they heard of the advice, were full of wrath, and forthwith surrounded Lycidas and stoned him to death. As for Murikides, the Hellespontine Greek, him they sent away unharmed. Now there was a stir in the island about Lycidas, and the Athenian women learned what had happened. Then each exhorted a fellow, and one brought another to take part in the deed. And they all flocked of their own accord to the house of Lycidas, and stoned to death his wife and his children. The circumstances under which the Athenians had sought refuge in Salamis were the following. So long as any hope remained that a Peloponnesian army would come to give them aid, they abode still in Attica. But when it appeared that the allies were slack and slow to move, while the invader was reported to be pressing forward and to have already entered Boeotia, then they proceeded to remove their gods and chattels from the mainland, and themselves again crossed the straits into Salamis. At the same time they sent ambassadors to Lacedaemon, who were to reproach the Lacedaemonians for having allowed the barbarian to advance into Attica, instead of joining them and going out to meet him in Boeotia. They were likewise to remind the Lacedaemonians of the offers by which the Persian hand sought to win Athens over to his side, and to warn them that if no aid came from Sparta, the Athenians must consult for their own safety. The truth was, the Lacedaemonians were keeping holiday at that time, for it was the feast of the Hyacinthia, and they thought nothing of so much moment as to perform the service of the god. They were also engaged in building their wall across the isthmus, which was now so far advanced that the battlements had begun to be placed upon it. When the envoys of the Athenians, accompanied by ambassadors from Megara and Plataea, reached Lacedaemon, they came before the ephors and spoke as follows. The Athenians have sent us to you to say, we shall not, of our own free will, consent to any terms of peace. Thus do we, in all our dealings with the Greeks, avoid what is base and counterfeit. While contrariwise, ye, who were but now so full of fear, lest we should make terms with the enemy, having learned to what temper we are, and assured yourselves that we shall not prove traitors to our country, having brought moreover your wall across the isthmus to an advanced state, cease altogether to have any care for us. Ye covenanted with us to go out and meet the Persians in Boeotia, but when the time came, ye were false to your word, and looked on while the barbarian host advanced into Attica. At this time, therefore, the Athenians are angered with you, and justly, for ye have not done what was right. They bid you, however, make haste to send forth your army, that we may even yet meet Mardonius in Attica. Now that Boeotia is lost to us, the best place for the fight within our country will be the plain of Thria. The Ephors, when they heard this speech, delayed their answer till the morrow, and when the morrow came, till the day following. And thus they acted for 10 days, continually putting off the ambassadors from one day to the next. Meanwhile, the Peloponnesians generally were labouring with great zeal at the wall, and the work nearly approached completion. At last the ambassadors got an answer, and the troops marched forth from Sparta under the following circumstances. The last audience had been fixed for the ambassadors when, the very day before it was to be given, a certain Tegean named Kileos, a man who had more influence at Sparta than any other foreigner, learning from the Ephors exactly what the Athenians had said, addressed these words to them. The case stands thus, O ye Ephors. If the Athenians are not our friends, but league themselves with the barbarians, however strong our wall across the isthmus may be, there will be doors enough, and wide enough open too, by which the Persian may gain entrance to the Peloponnese. Grant their request then, before they make any fresh resolve, which may bring Greece to ruin. Such was the counsel which Kileus gave, and the Ephors, taking the advice into consideration, determined forthwith, without speaking a word to the ambassadors from the 3 cities, to dispatch to the isthmus a body of 5,000 Spartans, and accordingly they sent them forth the same night, appointing to each Spartan a retinue of 7 helots, and giving the command of the expedition to Pausanias, the son of Cleombrotus. Later, a body of 5,000 Lacedaemonian Parisi, all picked men and fully armed, set forth from Sparta in the company of the ambassadors. When Mardonius learnt that the Spartans were on their march, he no longer cared to remain in Attica. Hitherto he had kept quiet, wishing to see what the Athenians would do, and had neither ravaged their territory nor done it any the least harm, for till now he had cherished the hope that the Athenians would come to terms with him. As, however, he found that his persuasions were of no avail, and as their whole policy was now clear to him, he determined to withdraw from Attica before Pausanias with his army reached the isthmus. First, however, he resolved to burn Athens, and to cast down and level with the ground whatever remained standing of the walls, temples, and other buildings. His reason for retreating was that Attica was not a country where horse could act with advantage, and further, that if he suffered defeat in a battle, no way of escape was open to him, except through defiles, where a handful of troops might stop all his army. So he determined to withdraw to Thebes, and give the Greeks battle in the neighbourhood of a friendly city, and on ground well suited for cavalry. After he had quitted Attica, and was already upon his march, news reached him that a body of 1,000 Lacedaemonians, distinct from the army of Pausanias, and sent on in advance, had arrived in the Megarid. When he heard it, wishing if possible to destroy this detachment first, Mardonius considered with himself how he might compass their ruin. With a sudden change of march, he made for Megara, while the horse, pushing on in advance, entered and ravaged the Megarid. Here was the furthest point in Europe towards the setting sun to which this Persian army ever penetrated. After this, Mardonius received another message, whereby he learnt that the forces of the Greeks were collected together at the isthmus, which tidings caused him to draw back and leave Attica by way of Decelea, which brought him into the territory of the Thebans. And now, although the Thebans had espoused the cause of the Persians, yet Mardonius cut down all the trees in these parts, not however from any enmity towards the Thebans, but on account of his own urgent needs, for he wanted a rampart to protect his army from attack, and he likewise desired to have a place of refuge whither his troops might flee, in case the battle should go contrary to his wishes. His army at this time lay on the Asopus and stretched from Erythrae to the territory of the Plataeans. The wall, however, was not made to extend so far, but formed a square of about 10 furlongs each way. The Lacedaemonians, when they reached the isthmus, pitched their camp there, and the other Peloponnesians who had embraced the good side, hearing or else seeing that they were upon the march, thought it not right to remain behind when the Spartans were going forth to the war. So the Peloponnesians went out in one body from the isthmus, the omens being favourable for setting forth, and marched as far as Eleusis, where again they offered sacrifices, and finding the omens still encouraging, advanced further. At Eleusis they were joined by the Athenians, who had come across from Salamis, and now accompanied the main army. On reaching Erythrae in Boeotia, they learnt that the barbarians were encamped upon the Asopus, wherefore they themselves, after considering how they should act, disposed their forces opposite to the enemy upon the slopes of Mount Cithaeron. Mardonius, when he saw that the Greeks would not come down into the plain, sent all his cavalry under Masistius to attack them where they were. Now Masistius was a man of much repute among the Persians, and rode a Nisaean charger with a golden bit, and otherwise magnificently caparisoned. So the horse advanced against the Greeks, and made attacks upon them in divisions, doing them great damage at each charge, and insulting them by calling them women. It chanced that the Megareans were drawn up in the position most open to attack, and where the ground offered the best approach to the cavalry. Finding themselves therefore hard pressed by the assaults upon their ranks, they sent a herald to the Greek leaders, who came and said to them, "This is the message of the Megareans. We cannot, brothers in arms, continue to resist the Persian horse in that post which we have occupied from the first, if we are left without succour. Hitherto, although hard pressed, we have held out against them firmly and courageously. Now, however, if you do not send others to take our place, we warn you that we shall quit our post." None were willing to go, whereupon the Athenians offered themselves, and a body of picked men, 300 in number, commanded by Olympiodorus, the son of Lampo, undertook the service. Selecting to accompany them the whole body of archers, these men relieved the Megareans, and occupied a post which all the other Greeks, collected at Erythrae, had shrunk from holding. After the struggle had continued for a while, it came to an end on this wise. As the barbarians continued charging in divisions, the horse of Masistius, which was in front of the others, received an arrow in his flank, the pain of which caused him to rear and throw his rider. Immediately the Athenians rushed upon Masistius as he lay, caught his horse, and when he himself made resistance, slew him. All this took place without any of the other horsemen seeing it. They had neither observed their leader fall from his horse, nor beheld him slain. For he fell as they wheeled round and prepared for another charge, so that they were quite ignorant of what had happened. When, however, they halted and found that there was no one to marshal their line, Masistius was missed. An instant his soldiers, understanding what must have befallen him, with loud cheers charged the enemy in one mass, hoping to recover the dead body. So when the Athenians saw that, instead of coming up in squadrons, the whole mass of the horse was about to charge them at once, they called out to the other troops to make haste to their aid. While the rest of the infantry, however, was moving to their assistance, the contest waxed fierce about the dead body of Masistius. The 300, so long as they fought by themselves, had greatly the worse of the encounter, and were forced to retire and yield up the body to the enemy. But when the other troops approached, the Persian horse could no longer hold their ground, but fled without carrying off the body, having incurred in the attempt a further loss of several of their number. They therefore retired about 2 furlongs, and consulted with each other what was best to be done. Being without a leader, it seemed to them the fittest course to return to Mardonius. When the horse reached the camp, Mardonius and all the Persian army made great lamentation for Masistius. They shaved off all the hair from their own heads, and cut the manes from their war horses and their sumpter beasts, while they vented their grief in such loud cries that all Boeotia resounded with the clamour, because they had lost the man who, next to Mardonius, was held in the greatest esteem, both by the king and by the Persians generally. So the barbarians, after their own fashion, paid honours to the dead Masistius. The Greeks, on the other hand, were greatly emboldened by what had happened, seeing that they had not only stood their ground against the attacks of the horse, but had even compelled them to beat a retreat. They therefore placed the dead body of Masistius upon a cart and paraded it along the ranks of the army. Now the body was a sight which well deserved to be gazed upon, being remarkable both for stature and for beauty, and it was to stop the soldiers from leaving their ranks to look at it that they resolved to carry it round. After this, the Greeks determined to quit the high ground and go nearer Plataea, as the land there seemed far more suitable for an encampment than the country about Erythrae, particularly because it was better supplied with water. To this place, therefore, and more especially to a spring head which was called Gargaphia, they considered that it would be best for them to remove, after which they might once more encamp in their order. All, except the Helots, 7 of whom, as I said, attended each Spartan, were heavy-armed troops, and they amounted to 38,700 men. This was the number of hoplites, or heavy-armed soldiers, which was brought together against the barbarian. The light-armed troops consisted of the 35,000 ranged with the Spartans, 7 in attendance upon each, who were all well equipped for war, and of 34,500 others belonging to the Lacedaemonians and the rest of the Greeks, at the rate nearly of 1 light to 1 heavy-armed. Thus the entire number of the light-armed was 69,500. The Greek army, therefore, which mustered at Plataea, counting light-armed as well as heavy-armed, was but 1,800 men short of 110,000, and this amount was exactly made up by the Thespians who were present in the camp. For 1,800 Thespians, being the whole number left, were likewise with the army, though these men were without arms. Such was the array of the Greek troops when they took post on the Asopus. The barbarians under Mardonius, when the mourning for Masistius was at an end, and they learnt that the Greeks were in the Plataean territory, moved likewise towards the river Asopus, which flows in those parts. The number of the barbarians was 300,000. That of the Greeks who had made alliance with Mardonius is known to none, for they were never counted. I should guess that they mustered near 50,000 strong. The troops thus marshalled were all foot soldiers. As for the horse, it was drawn up by itself. When the marshalling of Mardonius's troops by nations and by maniples was ended, the 2 armies proceeded on the next day to offer sacrifice. The Grecian sacrifice was offered by Tisamenus, the son of Antiochus, who accompanied the army as soothsayer. He found the omens favourable if the Greeks stood on the defensive, but not if they began the battle or crossed the river Asopus. With Mardonius also, who was very eager to begin the battle, the omens were not favourable for so doing. But he likewise found them bode him well, if he was content to stand on his defence. So when the omens did not allow either the Persians or their Greek allies to begin the battle, and when soldiers continued to pour into the opposite camp, and the numbers on the Greek side to increase continually, Timagenidas, the son of Herpis, a Theban, advised Mardonius to keep a watch on the passes of Cytheron, telling him how supplies of men kept flocking in day after day, and assuring him that he might cut off large numbers. It was 8 days after the 2 armies first encamped opposite to one another, when this advice was given by Timagenidas. Mardonius, seeing it to be good, as soon as evening came, sent his cavalry to that pass of Mount Cytheron which opens out upon Plataea. The barbarians indeed advanced as far as the Asopus, and endeavoured to tempt the Greeks to cross, but neither side actually passed the stream. Still the cavalry of Mardonius harassed and annoyed the Greeks incessantly, for the Thebans, who were zealous in the cause of the Persians, pressed the war forward with all eagerness, and often left the charge till the lines met, when the Persians took their place and displayed, many of them, uncommon valour. For 10 days nothing was done more than this, but on the 11th day, from the time when the 2 hosts first took station, one over against the other near Plataea, the number of the Greeks being now much greater than it was at first, and Mardonius being impatient of the delay, there was a conference held between Mardonius and Artabazus, a man who was esteemed by Xerxes more than almost any of the Persians. At this consultation the following were the opinions delivered. Artabazus thought it would be best for them to break up from their quarters as soon as possible and withdraw the whole army to the fortified town of Thebes, where they had abundant stores of corn for themselves and of fodder for the sumpter beasts. There, he said, they had only to sit quiet, and the war might be brought to an end on this wise. Coined gold was plentiful in the camp, and uncoined gold too. They had silver moreover in great abundance, and drinking cups. Let them not spare to take of these, and distribute them amongst the Greeks, especially amongst the leaders in the several cities. 'Twould not be long before the Greeks gave up their liberty without risking another battle for it. Mardonius, on the other hand, expressed himself with more fierceness and obstinacy, and was utterly disinclined to yield. Our army, he said, is vastly superior to that of the Greeks, and we had best engage at once, and not wait till greater numbers are declared against us. When Mardonius had thus declared his sentiments, no one ventured to say him nay, and accordingly his opinion prevailed, for it was to him and not to Artabazus that the king had given the command of the army. Mardonius now sent for the captains of the squadrons and the leaders of the Greeks in his service and questioned them. Did they know of any prophecy which said that the Persians were to be destroyed in Greece? All were silent, some because they did not know the prophecies, but others who knew them full well, because they did not think it safe to speak out. So Mardonius, when none answered, said, Since ye know of no such oracle, or do not dare to speak of it, I, who know it well, will myself declare it to you. There is an oracle which says that the Persians shall come into Greece, sack the temple at Delphi, and when they have so done, perish one and all. Now we, as we are aware of the prediction, will neither go against the temple, nor make any attempt to sack it. We therefore shall not perish for this trespass. Rejoice then thus far, all ye who are well-wishers to the Persians, and doubt not we shall get the better of the Greeks. When he had so spoken, he further ordered them to prepare themselves, and to put all in readiness for a battle upon the morrow. After Mardonius had put his question about the prophecies and spoken the above words of encouragement, night drew on apace, and on both sides the watches were set. As soon then as there was silence throughout the camp, the night being now well advanced, and the men seeming to be in their deepest sleep, Alexander, king and leader of the Macedonians, rode up on horseback to the Athenian outposts, and desired to speak with the generals. Hereupon, while the greater part continued on guard, some of the watch ran to the chiefs and told them. There had come a horseman from the Persian camp, who would not say a word, except that he wished to speak with the generals, of whom he mentioned the names. They at once, hearing this, made haste to the outpost, where they found Alexander, who addressed them as follows. Men of Athens, that which I am about to say I trust to your honour, and I charge you to keep it secret from all excepting Pausanias, if you would not bring me to destruction. Had I not greatly at heart the common welfare of Greece, I should not have come to tell you. But I am myself a Greek by descent, and I would not willingly see Greece exchange freedom for slavery. Know then that Mardonius and his army cannot obtain favourable omens. Had it not been for this, they would have fought with you long ago. Now, however, they have determined to let the omens pass unheeded, and as soon as day dawns to engage in battle. Mardonius, I imagine, is afraid that if he delays, you will increase in number. Make ready then to receive them. Should he, however, still defer the combat, do you abide where you are, for his provisions will not hold out many more days. If you prosper in this war, forget not to do something for my freedom. Consider the risk I have run, out of zeal for the Greek cause, to acquaint you with what Mardonius intends, and to save you from being surprised by the barbarians. I am Alexander of Macedon. As soon as he had said this, Alexander rode back to the camp, and returned to the station assigned to him. Meanwhile, the Athenian generals hastened to the right wing, and told Pausanias all that they had learnt from Alexander. Hereupon Pausanias, who had no sooner heard the intention of the Persians than he was struck with fear, addressed the generals and said, Since the battle is to come with tomorrow's dawn, it were well that you Athenians should stand opposed to the Persians, and we Spartans to the Boeotians and the other Greeks. For you know the Persians and their manner of fight, since ye have already fought with them once at Marathon. But we are quite ignorant and without any experience of their warfare. While, however, there is not a Spartan here present who has ever fought against a Persian, of the Boeotians and Thessalians we have had experience. Take then your arms and march over to our post upon the right, while we supply your place in the left wing. Hereto the Athenians replied, We too long ago, when we saw that the Persians were drawn up to face you, were minded to suggest to you the very course which you have now been the first to bring forward. We feared, however, that perhaps our words might not be pleasing to you. But as you have now spoken of these things yourselves, we gladly give our consent, and are ready to do as ye have said. Both sides agreeing hereto, at the dawn of day the Spartans and Athenians changed places. But the movement was perceived by the Boeotians, and they gave notice of it to Mardonius, who at once, on hearing what had been done, made a change in the disposition of his own forces, and brought the Persians to face the Lacedaemonians. Then Pausanias, finding that his design was discovered, led back his Spartans to the right wing, and Mardonius, seeing this, replaced his Persians upon the left of his army. When the troops again occupied their former posts, Mardonius sent a herald to the Spartans, who spoke as follows. Lacedaemonians, in these parts the men say that you are the bravest of mankind, and admire you because you never turn your backs in flight, nor quit your ranks, but always stand firm, and either die at your posts, or else destroy your adversaries. But in all this which they say concerning you, there is not one word of truth. For now we have seen you before battle was joined, or our two hosts had come to blows, flying and leaving your posts, wishing the Athenians to make the first trial of our arms, and taking your own station against our slaves. Surely these are not the deeds of brave men? Much do we find ourselves deceived in you, for we believed the reports of you that reached our ears, and expected that you would send a herald with a challenge to us, proposing to fight with yourselves against our division of native Persians. We for our part were ready to have agreed to this, but ye have made us no such offer. Nay, ye seem rather to shrink from meeting us. However, as no challenge of this kind comes from you to us, lo, we send a challenge to you. Why should not you, on the part of the Greeks, as you are thought to be the bravest of all, and we on the part of the barbarians, fight a battle with equal numbers on both sides? Then, if it seems good to the others to fight likewise, let them engage afterwards. But if not, if they are content that we should fight on behalf of all, let us so do. And whichever side wins the battle, let them win it for their whole army. When the herald had thus spoken, he waited a while. But as no one made him any answer, he went back and told Mardonius what had happened. Mardonius was full of joy thereat, and so puffed up by the empty victory that he at once gave orders to his horse to charge the Greek lines. Then the horsemen drew near, and with their javelins and their arrows, for though horsemen they used the bow, sorely distressed the Greek troops, which could not bring them to close combat. The fountains of Gargaphia, whence the whole Greek army drew its water, they at this time choked up and spoiled. When the fountain was choked, the Grecian captains, seeing that the army had no longer a watering place, and observing moreover that the cavalry greatly harassed them, held a meeting on these and other matters at the headquarters of Pausanias upon the right. For besides the above-named difficulties, which were great enough, other circumstances added to their distress. All the provisions that they had brought with them were gone, and the attendants who had been sent to fetch supplies from the Peloponnese were prevented from returning to camp by the Persian horse, which had now closed the passage. The captains therefore held a council, whereat it was agreed that if the Persians did not give battle that day, the Greeks should move to the island, a tract of ground which lies in front of Plataea at a distance of 10 furlongs from the Asopus and Fount Gargaphia, where the army was encamped at that time. This tract was a sort of island in the continent, for there is a river which, dividing near its source, runs down from Mount Cithaeron into the plain below in 2 streams, flowing in channels about 3 furlongs apart, which after a while unite and become one. The name of this river is Eroe, and the dwellers in those parts call it the daughter of the Asopus. This was the place to which the Greeks resolved to remove, and they chose it, first because there would be no lack of water, and secondly because the horse could not harass them as when it was drawn up right in their front. They thought it best to begin their march at the second watch of the night, lest the Persians should see them as they left their station and should follow and harass them with their cavalry. It was agreed likewise that after they had reached the place which the Asopus-born Aroe surrounds as it flows down from Kithaeron, they should dispatch the very same night one half of their army towards that mountain range to relieve those whom they had sent to procure provisions and who were now blocked up in that region. At length, when towards dusk the attacks of the horse ceased, and night having closed in, the hour arrived at which the army was to commence its retreat. The greater number struck their tents and began the march towards the rear. They were not minded, however, to make for the place agreed upon, but in their anxiety to escape from the Persian horse, no sooner had they begun to move than they fled straight to Plataea, where they took post at the temple of Hera, which lies outside the city, at the distance of about 20 furlongs from Gargaphia, and here they pitched their camp in front of the sacred building. As soon as Pausanias saw a portion of the troops in motion, he issued orders to the Lacedaemonians to strike their tents and follow those who had been the first to depart, supposing that they were on their march to the place agreed upon. All the captains but one were ready to obey his orders. Amompharetus, however, the son of Polyidus, who was leader of the Pitonati cohort, refused to move, saying, he for one would not fly from the strangers, or of his own will bring disgrace upon Sparta. It had happened that he was absent from the former conference of the captains, and so what was now taking place astonished him. Pausanias and Euryanax thought it a monstrous thing that Amompharetus should not hearken to them, but considered that it would yet be more monstrous if, when he was so minded, they were to leave the Pitonates to their fate, seeing that if they forsook them to keep their agreement with the other Greeks, Amompharetus and those with him might perish. On this account, therefore, they kept the Lacedaemonian force in its place, and made every endeavour to persuade Amompharetus that he was wrong to act as he was so doing. While the Spartans were engaged in these efforts to turn Amompharetus, the only man unwilling to retreat either in their own army or in that of the Tegeans, the Athenians on their side did as follows. Knowing that it was the Spartan temper to say one thing and to do another, they remained quiet in their station until the army began to retreat, when they dispatched a horseman to see whether the Spartans really meant to set forth, or whether, after all, they had no intention of moving. The horseman was also to ask Pausanias what he wished the Athenians to do. The herald, on his arrival, found the Lacedaemonians drawn up in their old position, and their leaders quarrelling with one another. Pausanias, turning to the Athenian herald, bade him to tell his countrymen how he was occupied, and asked them to approach nearer and retreat or not, according to the movements of the Spartans. So the herald went back to the Athenians, and the Spartans continued to dispute till morning began to dawn upon them. Then Pausanias, who as yet had not moved, gave the signal for retreat, expecting, and rightly as the event proved, that Amompharetus, when he saw the rest of the Lacedaemonians in motion, would be unwilling to be left behind. Mardonius, when he heard that the Greeks had retired under cover of the night, crossed the Asopus and led the Persians forward at a run directly upon the track of the Greeks, whom he believed to be in actual flight. He could not see the Athenians, for as they had taken the way of the plain, they were hidden from his sight by the hills. He therefore led on his troops against the Lacedaemonians and the Tegeans only. When the commanders of the other divisions of the barbarians saw the Persians pursuing the Greeks so hastily, they all forthwith seized their standards and hurried after at their best speed in great disorder and disarray. On they went with loud shouts and in a wild rout, thinking to swallow up the runaways. Meanwhile, Pausanias had sent a horseman to the Athenians at the time when the cavalry first fell upon him with this message: Men of Athens, now that the great struggle has come, which is to decide the freedom or the slavery of Greece, we twain, Lacedaemonians and Athenians, are deserted by all the other allies, who have fled away from us during the past night. Nevertheless, we are resolved what to do. We must endeavour, as best we may, to defend ourselves and to succour one another. Now, had the horse fallen upon you first, we ourselves, with the Tegeans who remained faithful to the Greek cause, would have been bound to render you assistance against them. As, however, the entire body has advanced upon us, 'tis your place to come to our aid, sore pressed as we are by the enemy. Should you yourselves be so straitened that you cannot come, at least send us your archers, and be sure you will earn our gratitude. We acknowledge that throughout this whole war there has been no zeal to be compared to yours. We therefore doubt not that you will do us this service." The Athenians, as soon as they received this message, were anxious to go to the aid of the Spartans, and to help them to the uttermost of their power. But as they were upon the march, the Greeks on the Persian side, whose place in the line had been opposite theirs, fell upon them, and so harassed them by their attacks that it was not possible for them to give the succour they desired. Accordingly, the Lacedaemonians and the Tegeans, whom nothing could induce to quit their side, were left alone to resist the Persians. Including the light-armed, the number of the former was 50,000, while that of the Tegeans was 3,000. Now, therefore, as they were about to engage with Mardonius and the troops under him, they made ready to offer sacrifice. The omens, however, for some time were not favourable, and during the delay many fell on the Spartan side, and a still greater number were wounded. For the Persians had made a rampart of their wicker shields, and shot from behind them such clouds of arrows that the Spartans were sorely distressed. The omens continued unpropitious, till at last Pausanias raised his eyes to the Heraeum of the Plataeans, and calling the goddess to his aid, besought her not to disappoint the hopes of the Greeks. As he offered his prayers, the Tegeans, advancing before the rest, rushed forward against the enemy, and the Lacedaemonians, who had obtained favourable omens the moment that Pausanias prayed, at length, after their long delay, advanced to the attack, while the Persians on their side left shooting and prepared to meet them. And first, the combat was at the wicker shields. Afterwards, when these were swept down, a fierce contest took place by the side of the temple of Demeter, which lasted longer, and ended in a hand-to-hand struggle. The barbarians many times seized hold of the Greek spears and brake them, for in boldness and warlike spirit the Persians were not a whit inferior to the Greeks. But they were without armour, untrained, and far below the enemy in respect of skill in arms. Sometimes singly, sometimes in bodies of 10, now fewer, now more in number, they dashed forward upon the Spartan ranks, and so perished. The fight went most against the Greeks, where Mardonius, mounted upon a white horse, and surrounded by the bravest of all the Persians, the 1,000 picked men, fought in person. So long as Mardonius was alive, this body resisted all attacks, and while they defended their own lives, struck down no small number of Spartans. But after Mardonius fell, and the troops with him, which were the main strength of the army, perished, the remainder yielded to the Lacedaemonians and took to flight. Their light clothing and want of armour were of the greatest hurt to them, for they had to contend against men heavily armed, while they themselves were without any such defence. Then was the warning of the oracle fulfilled, and the vengeance which was due to the Spartans for the slaughter of Leonidas was paid to them by Mardonius. Then too did Pausanias win a victory exceeding in glory all those to which our knowledge extends. The Persians, as soon as they were put to flight by the Lacedaemonians, ran hastily away, without preserving any order, and took refuge in their own camp, within the wooden defence which they had raised in the Theban territory. To me it shows very clearly how completely the rest of the barbarians were dependent upon the Persian troops, that here they all fled at once, without ever coming to blows with the enemy, merely because they saw the Persians running away. And so it came to pass that the whole army took to flight, except only the horse, both Persian and Boeotian. These did good service to the flying footmen, by advancing close to the enemy and separating between the Greeks and their own fugitives. The victors, however, pressed on, pursuing and slaying the remnant of the Persian army. The Persians, and the multitude with them who fled to the wooden fortress were able to ascend into the towers before the Lacedaemonians came up. Thus placed, they proceeded to strengthen the defences as well as they could, and when the Lacedaemonians arrived, a sharp fight took place at the rampart. So long as the Athenians were away, the barbarians kept off their assailants and had much the best of the combat, since the Lacedaemonians were unskilled in the attack of walled places. But on the arrival of the Athenians, a more violent assault was made, and the wall was for a long time attacked with fury. In the end, the valour of the Athenians and their perseverance prevailed. They gained the top of the wall, and breaking a breach through it, enabled the Greeks to pour in. The first to enter here were the Tegeans, and they it was who plundered the tent of Mardonius, where among other booty they found the manger from which his horses ate, all made of solid brass and well worth looking at. As soon as the wall was broken down, the barbarians no longer kept together in an array, nor was there anyone among them who thought of making further resistance. In good truth, they were all half dead with fright, huddled as so many thousands were into so narrow and confined a space. With such tameness did they submit to be slaughtered by the Greeks, that of the 300,000 men who composed the army, omitting the 40,000 by whom Artabazus was accompanied in his flight, no more than 3,000 outlived the battle. Of the Lacedaemonians from Sparta, they perished in this combat 91. Of the Tegeans 16. Of the Athenians 52. After this, Pausanias caused proclamation to be made that no one should lay hands on the booty, but that the Helots should collect it and bring it all to one place. So the Helots went and spread themselves throughout the camp, wherein were found many tents richly adorned with furniture of gold and silver, many couches covered with plates of the same, and many golden bowls, goblets, and other drinking vessels. On the carriages were bags containing silver and golden kettles, and the bodies of the slain furnished bracelets and chains, and scimitars with golden ornaments, not to mention embroidered apparel, of which no one made any account. When all the booty had been brought together, a tenth of the whole was set apart for the Delphian god, and hence was made the golden tripod which stands on the bronze serpent with the 3 heads quite close to the altar. Portions were also set apart for the gods of Olympia and of the Isthmus, from which were made in the one case a bronze Zeus 10 cubits high, and the other a bronze Poseidon of 7 cubits. After this, the rest of the spoil was divided among the soldiers, each of whom received less or more according to his deserts. And in this way was a distribution made of the Persian concubines, of the gold, the silver, the beasts of burden, and all the other valuables. It is said that the following circumstance happened likewise at this time. Xerxes, when he fled away out of Greece, left his war tent with Mardonius. When Pausanias therefore saw the tent with its adornment of gold and silver, and its hangings of divers colours, he gave commandment to the bakers and the cooks to make him ready a banquet in such a fashion as was their wont for Mardonius. Then they made ready as they were bidden, and Pausanias, beholding the couches of gold and silver daintily decked out with their rich covertures, and the tables of gold and silver laid, and the feast itself prepared with all magnificence, was astonished at the good things which were set before him, and being in a pleasant mood, gave commandment to his own followers to make ready a Spartan supper. When the suppers were both served, and it was apparent how vast a difference lay between the two, Pausanias laughed, and sent his servants to call to him the Greek generals. On their coming, he pointed to the 2 boards and said, "I sent for you, O Greeks, to show you the folly of this Persian captain, who, when he enjoyed such fare as this, must needs come here to rob us of our penury." Such, it is said, were the words of Pausanias to the Grecian generals. on the same day that the blow was struck at Plataea, another defeat befell the Persians at Mycale in Ionia. While the Greek fleet under Leotychides the Lacedaemonian was still lying inactive at Delos, there arrived at that place an embassy from Samos consisting of 3 men, Lampon, Athenagoras, and Hegesistratus. The Samians had sent them secretly, concealing their departure both from the Persians and from their own tyrant Theomasta, whom the Persians had made ruler of Samos. When the ambassador came before the Greek captains, Hegesistratus took the word, and urged them with many and various arguments, saying that the Ionians only needed to see them arrive in order to revolt from the Persians, and that the Persians would never abide their coming, or if they did, 'twould be to offer them the finest booty that they could anywhere expect to gain. While at the same time he made appeal to the gods of their common worship, and besought them to deliver from bondage a Grecian race, and withal to drive back the barbarians. When the Samian stranger continued importunately beseeching him, Leotychides, either because he wanted an omen or by a mere chance, as God guided him, asked the man, "Samian stranger, prithee, tell me thy name." "Hegesistratus, army leader," answered the other, and might have said more, but Leotychides stopped him by exclaiming, "I accept, O Samian, the order which thy name affords. Only, before thou goest back, swear to us, thyself and thy brother envoys, that the Samians will indeed be our warm friends and allies." No sooner had he thus spoken than he proceeded to hurry forward the business. The Samians pledged their faith upon the spot, and oaths of alliance were exchanged between them and the Greeks. The Greeks, as soon as the omens were favourable, put to sea, and sailed across from Delos to Samos. Arriving off Calame, a place upon the Samian coast, they brought the fleet to an anchor near the temple of Hera, which stands there, and prepared to engage the Persians by sea. These latter, however, no sooner heard of the approach of the Greeks than, dismissing the Phoenician ships, they sailed away with the remainder to the mainland. For it had been resolved in council not to risk a battle, since the Persian fleet was thought to be no match for that of the enemy. They fled, therefore, to the main to be under the protection of their land army, which now lay at Mycale, and consisted of the troops left behind by Xerxes to keep guard over Ionia. This was an army of 60,000 men, under the command of Tigranes, a Persian of more than common beauty and stature. The captains resolved, therefore, to betake themselves to these troops for defence, to drag their ships ashore, and to build a rampart around them, which might at once protect the fleet and serve likewise as a place of refuge for themselves. Here they were prepared either to win a battle or undergo a siege, their thoughts embracing both chances. Now when the Greeks came to the place where the camp was, they found no one ventured out to meet them, but observed the ships all dragged ashore within the barrier, and a strong land force drawn up in battle array upon the beach. Leotychides therefore sailed along the shore in his ship, keeping as close hold to the land as possible, and by the voice of a herald thus addressed the Ionians. "Men of Ionia, ye who can hear me speak, do ye take heed to what I say. For the Persians will not understand a word that I utter. When we join battle with them, before aught else, remember freedom, and next recollect our watchword, which is Hebe. If there be any who hear me not, let those who hear report my words to the others." In all this Leotychides had the very same design which Themistocles entertained at Artemisium. Either the barbarians would not know what he had said, and the Ionians would be persuaded to revolt from them, or if his words were reported to the former, they would mistrust their Greek soldiers. After Leotychides had made this address, the Greeks brought their ships to the land, and having disembarked, arrayed themselves for the battle. When the Persians saw them marshalling their array, and bethought themselves of the advice which had been offered to the Ionians, their first act was to disarm the Samians, whom they suspected of complicity with the enemy. After disarming them, the Persians next dispatched the Milesians to guard the paths which led up into the heights of Mycale, because, they said, the Milesians were well acquainted with that region. Their true object, however, was to remove them to a distance from the camp. In this way the Persians sought to secure themselves against such of the Ionians as they thought likely, if occasion offered, to make rebellion. Then they joined shield to shield, and so made themselves a breastwork against the enemy. The Greeks now, having finished their preparations, began to move towards the barbarians, when lo, as they advanced, a rumour flew through the host from one end to the other, that the Greeks had fought and conquered the army of Mardonius in Boeotia. At the same time a herald's wand was observed lying upon the beach. Many things prove to me that the gods take part in the affairs of man. How else, when the battles of Mycale and Plataea were about to open on the selfsame day, should such a rumour have reached the Greeks in that region, greatly cheering the whole army, and making them more eager than before to risk their lives? So the Greeks and the barbarians rushed with like eagerness to the fray. For the Hellespont and the islands formed the prize for which they were about to fight. The Athenians, and the force drawn up with them, who formed one half of the army, marched along the shore where the country was low and level, but the way for the Lacedaemonians and the troops with them lay across hills in a torrent course. Hence, while the Lacedaemonians were effecting their passage round, the Athenians on the other wing had already closed with the enemy. So long as the wicker shields of the Persians continued standing, they made a stout defence, and had not even the worst of the battle. But when the Athenians and the allies with them, wishing to make the victory their own and not share it with the Lacedaemonians, cheered each other on with shouts and attacked them with the utmost fierceness, then at last the face of things became changed. For bursting through the lines of shields and rushing forwards in a body, the Greeks fell upon the Persians, who, though they bore the charge and for a long time maintained their ground, yet at length took refuge in their entrenchment. Here the Athenians themselves, together with those that followed them in the line of battle, the Corinthians, the Sicyonians, and the Trozenians, pressed so closely on the steps of their flying foes that they entered along with them into the fortress. And now, when even their fortress was taken, the barbarians no longer offered resistance, but fled hastily away, all save only the Persians. They still continued to fight in knots of a few men against the Greeks, who kept pouring into the entrenchment. And here, while two of the Persian commanders fled, two fell upon the field. Artaentes and Ithymetres, who were leaders of the fleet, escaped. Mardontes and the commander of the land force, Tigranes, died fighting. The Persians still held out when the Lacedaemonians and their part of the army reached the camp and joined in the remainder of the battle. The number of Greeks who fell in the struggle here was not small. The Sicyonians especially lost many, and among the rest, Pereleus, their general. The Samians, who served with the Persians and who, although disarmed, still remained in the camp, seeing from the very beginning of the fight that the victory was doubtful, did all that lay in their power to render help to the Greeks. And the other Ionians likewise, beholding their example, revolted and attacked the Persians. As for the Milesians, who had been ordered for the better security of the Persians to guard the mountain paths, that, in case any accident befell them such as had now happened, they might not lack guides to conduct them into the higher tracts of Mycale, and who had also been removed to hinder them from making an outbreak in the Persian camp, they, instead of obeying their orders, broke them in every respect. For they guided the flying Persians by wrong roads, which brought them into the presence of the enemy, and at last they set upon them with their own hands, and showed themselves the hottest of their adversaries. Ionia, therefore, on this day revolted a second time from the Persians. The Greeks, when they had slaughtered the greater portion of the barbarians, either in the battle or in the rout, set fire to their ships and burnt them, together with the bulwark which had been raised for their defence. First, however, removing therefrom all the booty and carrying it down to the beach. Besides other plunder, they found here many caskets of money. Hereupon the Samians, Chians, Lesbians, and other islanders who had helped the Greeks at this time were received into the League of the Allies, and took the oaths, binding themselves to be faithful and not desert the common cause. Then the Greeks sailed away to the Hellespont, where they meant to break down the bridges which they supposed to be still extended across the strait. The barbarians, who escaped from the battle, a scanty remnant, took refuge in the heights of Mycale, whence they made good their retreat to Sardis. At Sardis they found the king, who had been there ever since he lost the sea fight and fled from Athens to Asia. During the time that Xerxes abode at this place, he fell in love with the wife of Mecistes, who was likewise staying in the city. He therefore sent her messages, but failed to win her consent, and he could not dare to use violence out of regard to Mecistes, his brother. This the woman knew well enough, and hence it was that she had the boldness to resist him. So Xerxes, finding no other way open, devised a marriage between his own son Darius and a daughter of this woman and Mecistes, thinking that he might better obtain his ends if he effected this union. Accordingly, he betrothed these two persons to one another, and after the usual ceremonies were completed, took his departure for Susa. When he was come there, and had received the woman into his palace as his son's bride, a change came over him, and losing all love for the wife of Mecistes, he conceived a passion for his son's bride, Mecistes' daughter. And Arteinta, for so was she called, very soon returned his love. After a while the thing was discovered in the way which I will now relate. Amestris, the wife of Xerxes, had woven with her own hands a long robe of many colours and very curious, which she presented to her husband as a gift. Xerxes, who was greatly pleased with it, forthwith put it on, and went in it to visit Arteinta, who happened likewise on this day to please him greatly. He therefore bade her ask him whatever boon she liked, and promised that, whatever it was, he would assuredly grant her request. Then Arteinta, who was doomed to suffer calamity together with her whole house, said to him, "Wilt thou indeed give me whatever I like to ask?" So the king, suspecting nothing less than that her chance would fall where it did, pledged his word and swore to her. She then, as soon as she heard his oath, asked boldly for the robe. Hereupon Xerxes tried all possible means to avoid the gift, not that he grudged to give it, but because he dreaded Amestris, who already suspected and would now, he feared, detect his love. So he offered her cities instead, and heaps of gold, and an army which should obey no other leader. The last of these is a thoroughly Persian gift. But as nothing could prevail on Arteinta to change her mind, at the last he gave her the robe. Then Arteinta was very greatly rejoiced, and she often wore the garment and was proud of it. And so it came to the ears of Amestris that the robe had been given to her. Now, when Amestris learnt the whole matter, she felt no anger against Arteinta, but looking upon her mother, the wife of Mecistes, as the cause of all the mischief, she determined to compass her death. She waited therefore till her husband gave the great royal banquet, a feast which takes place once every year in celebration of the king's birthday. Tikta, the feast is called in the Persian tongue, which in our language may be rendered perfect. And this is the only day in all the year on which the king soaps his head and distributes gifts to the Persians. Amestris waited accordingly for this day, and then made request of Xerxes that he would please to give her, as her present, the wife of Mecistes. But he refused, for it seemed to him shocking and monstrous to give into the power of another a woman who was not only his brother's wife, but was likewise wholly guiltless of what had happened, the more especially as he knew well enough with what intent Amestris had preferred her request. At length, however, wearied by her importunity, and constrained moreover by the law of the feast, which required that no one who asked a boon that day at the king's board should be denied his request, he yielded, but with a very ill will, and gave the woman into her power. Having so done, and told Amestris she might deal with her as she chose, the king called his brother into his presence, and said, "Mecistes, thou art my brother, the son of my father Darius, and what is more, thou art a good man. I pray thee, live no longer with the wife whom thou now hast. Behold, I will give thee instead my own daughter in marriage. Take her to live with thee, but part first with the wife thou now hast. I like not that thou keep to her. To this Mecistes, greatly astonished, answered, My lord and master, how strange a speech hast thou uttered! Thou biddest me put away my wife, who has borne me 3 goodly youths and daughters besides, whereof thou hast taken one and espoused her to a son of thine own. Thou biddest me put away this wife, notwithstanding that she pleases me greatly, and marry a daughter of thine own. In truth, O king, that I am accounted worthy to wed thy daughter is an honour which I mightily esteem. But yet to do as thou sayest am I in no wise willing. I pray thee, use not force to compel me to yield to thy prayer. Be sure thy daughter will find a husband to the full as worthy as myself. Suffer me then to live on with mine own wife. Thus did Mecistes answer. And Xerxes in wrath replied, I will tell thee, Mecistes, what thou hast gained by these words. I will not give thee my daughter, nor shalt thou live any longer with thine own wife. So mayest thou learn in time to come to take what is offered thee. Mecistes, when he heard this, withdrew, only saying, Master, thou hast not yet taken my life. While these things were passing between Xerxes and his brother Mecistes, Amestris sent for the spearmen of the royal bodyguard, and caused the wife of Mecistes to be mutilated in a horrible fashion. Her 2 breasts, her nose, ears, and lips were cut off and thrown to the dogs. Her tongue was torn out by the roots, and thus disfigured, she was sent back to her home. Mecistes, who knew nothing of what had happened, but was fearful that some calamity had befallen him, ran hastily to his house. There, finding his wife so savagely used, he forthwith took counsel with his sons, and accompanied by them and certain others also, set forth on his way to Bactria, intending to stir up revolt in that province, and hoping to do great hurt to Xerxes. All which, I believe, he would have accomplished if he had once reached the Bactrian and Sacan people, for he was greatly beloved by them both, and was, moreover, satrap of Bactria. But Xerxes, hearing of his designs, sent an armed force upon his track, and slew him while he was still upon the road, with his sons and his whole army. Such is the tale of King Xerxes' love, and of the death of his brother Mecistes. Meanwhile, the Greeks, who had left Mycale and sailed for the Hellespont, were forced by contrary winds to anchor near Lectum, from which place they afterwards sailed on to Abydos. On arriving here, they discovered that the bridges which they had thought to find standing, which had been the chief cause of their proceeding to the Hellespont, were already broken up and destroyed. Upon this discovery, Leotychides and the Peloponnesians under him were anxious to sail back to Greece. But the Athenians, with Xanthippus their captain, thought good to remain, and resolved to make an attempt upon the Chersonese. So while the Peloponnesians sailed away to their homes, the Athenians crossed over from Abydos to the Chersonese, and there laid siege to Sestos. When it was now late in the autumn and the siege still continued, the Athenians began to murmur that they were kept abroad so long, and seeing that they were not able to take the place, besought their captains to lead them back to their own country. But the captains refused to move, till either the city had fallen or the Athenian people ordered them to return home. So the soldiers patiently bore up against their sufferings. Meanwhile, those within the walls were reduced to the last straits, and forced even to boil the very thongs of their beds for food. At last, when these two failed them, Artiochtes the satrap fled away from the place by night, having let himself down from the wall at the back of the town, where the blockading force was scantiest. As soon as the day dawned, they of the Chersonese made signals to the Greeks from the walls, and let them know what had happened, at the same time throwing open the gates of their city. Hereupon, while some of the Greeks entered the town, others, and those the more numerous body, set out in pursuit of the enemy. This done, they sailed back to Greece, carrying with them, beside other treasures, the shore cables from the bridges of Xerxes, which they wished to dedicate in their temples. And this was all that took place that year. It was the grandfather of this Artaxerxes, one Artambares by name, who suggested to the Persians a proposal which they readily embraced, and thus urged upon Cyrus. Since Zeus, they said, has overthrown Astyages, and given the rule to the Persians, and to thee chiefly, O Cyrus, come now, let us quit this land wherein we dwell, for it is a scant land and rugged, and let us choose ourselves some other better country. Many such lie around us, some nearer, some further off. If we take one of these, men will admire us far more than they do now. Who that had the power would not so act? And when shall we have a fairer time than now, when we are lords of so many nations and rule all Asia? Then Cyrus, who did not greatly esteem the council, told them they might do so if they liked. But he warned them not to expect in that case to continue rulers, but to prepare for being ruled by others. Soft countries gave birth to soft men. There was no region which produced very delightful fruits, and at the same time men of a warlike spirit. So the Persians departed with altered minds, confessing that Cyrus was wiser than they, and chose rather to dwell in a churlish land and exercise lordship than to cultivate plains and be the slaves of others.